Hello and welcome to the IU College Insider podcast, a collaboration between the College of Arts and Sciences at Indiana University Bloomington and Indiana Public Media. Today, we're asking the question, how is AI changing higher education, and how is it changing everything else in our economy, workforce, and society? I'm Vivian Halloran, Associate Dean for Arts and Humanities in the College of Arts and Sciences. And we are filming on Ash Wednesday, thus my ashes. Joining me today are Justin Hodgson, an Associate Professor of English in the college. He's also the Strategic Director of Generative AI Faculty Initiatives here at IU. We also have Karna Desai joining us remotely in Washington, D.C. He's a Generative AI Strategist with Booz Allen Hamilton, where he works on generative AI in the national security sector and space domain awareness. He's also a graduate of the college at IU Bloomington, where he earned a Ph.D. in astronomy and astrophysics and a Ph.D. minor in scientific computing. Welcome to you both. We're going to get started then with some questions. Justin, let's start with you. When people think of AI in higher education, they don't inherently tend to assume that the experts we would be talking to would be an English professor. So do you want to describe for us how you use AI in your work, for example, your teaching, your research, your service?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I think English departments in general are somewhat resistant to the AI, so it does seem odd. But I always joke and say I'm about as far away from English as one gets while still being in an English department, right? Because I specialize in digital writing technologies and how they shape the way we think and the way we communicate. And so my work is a digital rhetoric scholar, which is just a fancy way of saying I study the way technologies impact our words. It allows me to spend time in that space of human-technology relationships. And so in my own work, if I'm thinking about research practices, one of my sort of go-to things is I'll have the generative AI tool of the day that I'm using. So let's say today I did ChatGPT, and I'm thinking, what are some gaps in my field? I mean, I kind of know, but it might be helpful to lean into the tool to help me sort of surface some things that maybe I'm not seeing. And so I'll ask it to say, here's what my work is on digital rhetoric. Can you identify some common gaps or missing areas or underexplored areas in the last 3 to 4 years? And then, give me a table that represents the thinking, the kind of topics we might explore, and also recommend some journals that I might want to look at. And funny enough, I did this the other day, and so like the rhetoric of prompt engineering was a concept that came up, which I've been thinking about writing anyways. And it gave me a brief abstract, and it showed me, kind of timeline for where I might look at, some recent work tied to it. And then it recommended the standard journals in rhetoric, which I expected, but a couple that were outside of my field. So like a media studies journal and one in like communication and technology that I hadn't heard of before. So, it's a simple tool. It's sort of like a career coach in a little bit of a way. And that's just, sort of one example for how we might leverage these things in our research. I'm obviously not using it to do the writing of my work. I would be a little crazy because it's not an expert in the way that I'm an expert. But the idea that it can aid in the workflow and be part of a collaborative thought partner is, I think, essential to what we might do with AI as scholars. And I always, this, you've heard me say this before, but what experts in their field can do with these tools is astronomically larger than what novices can do. And so the fact that I always find comical is that experts in our department are often hesitant to adopt these tools, even though it's going to open up so much more for them because of their expertise and the way they can recognize if the information is correct or missing content, and sort of take those practices and leverage them in new ways. So that's just one example for the way that I take up with these tools. But there's so many different ways we can use it in our work. But you're also in an English department, so I'm not the only one over here hiding in, sort of masquerading as an AI specialist. How do you take it up in your work?
Well, I would say that the two areas in which I use Gen AI tools most are in my teaching and then in my administrative work. In my teaching, I think it's important to highlight for students how to use Gen AI tools as tools rather than outsourcing their thinking to it, and to demystify the process and also make it a little bit of fun. I know that students sometimes have concerns about their intellectual property being used by the tools, but that's why it's so wonderful that at IU we have the contracts that we currently have that allow us to use these tools through the one IU EDU interface, and then the data is not stored. So that's one of the benefits that allow students not to think that they're giving all of their information to train future bots. But the other way in which I use it is to assist me when I'm having to do the kind of administrative searches that don't yield results using standard research techniques. Sometimes I need to find a person who has a position. I know they're employed, but it's not immediately visible where within an organization they are. And so I asked, in my case, Gemini, to act as a headhunter for academic positions, and then I give them as many details as I have about who it is I'm trying to find, and say I would like to contact them for an interview. And so then it produces usually several stages in that person's career, and it might yield things that I have not unearthed in traditional searches. But before we go to our guest, Karna, I do want to ask one other thing, which is, I'm a professor, you're a professor, but you also train other faculty in these tools. Do you want to speak about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure it'll come up multiple times. So, my full-time job, it seems like these days, is in specializing in faculty development. And helping other faculty from across all the IU schools and the various disciplines and ranks that we have to leverage digital creativity, digital literacy, and now generative AI literacies in their work. And so it's fascinating to me to see, once you can sort of help onboard some faculty, let them develop a bit of creative confidence and critical confidence with these tools, and teach them how AI can be leveraged in really intentional ways. The administrative one is absolutely a game changer for a lot of folks, whether you're reviewing GovDocs or whether you're sorting through like large-scale documents for compliance and you need to find a specific quote or a specific thing. Like those moments really open up the possibilities. And that's, we've seen sort of more and more faculty realize that AI, generative AI specifically, isn't as horrible as they make it out to be. There are some legitimate concerns, don't get me wrong, but on the end of like the service side of things, the operations of these technologies are really an easy way in for folks, especially if you have to do like, any sort of large scale language analytics. You're like looking for inconsistencies in documents, or you're trying to create meaningful workflows within your sort of day-to-day operations. It's not just about efficiency; it's about doing better work. And so I think as a development specialist, it's funny to me, and every time, because I always say faculty are the best and the worst students, because they're really smart and they're also hesitant to make mistakes. And our whole programs are built around letting people play with the devices and the technologies and learn through play and discover what works for them and what they're comfortable with in terms of ethics and approach and all those kind of things.
Which is a good point at which to bring in Karna Desai, because you are an IU grad with a Ph.D. in astronomy and a Ph.D. minor in scientific computing. Could you talk to us about, you are out as an IU grad, but in the workforce. How did your training at IU prepare you to do the kind of things that you are doing now as a, quote, generative AI strategist for national security, which is kind of an abstract term that people might not know what it means?
Awesome. So I'll focus on first the domain and then AI. But thanks so much for your question, Vivian. So when I was a student at IU, I also taught courses as an AI and associate instructor. Right. So I always told students that in astronomy, the night sky is a lab that is open for everybody. Satellites move, and the universe is very vast. Satellites move very fast. In the low Earth orbit at 5 miles per second, that's 17,000 miles per hour. And now the field is getting very crowded because we have more and more countries launching satellites into orbit. So we need to be able to track, and where I work, that is the space domain awareness field. So if you want to have a good understanding of what assets are and they are secure, that requires a lot of math and physics. So IU definitely prepped me technically to execute that mission. Now talk about AI and my role. In universities, AI is more used for learning. And as Justin mentioned, it can help administratively. And I think that's an awesome point. We can translate the same use case for us as enterprise use case, reviewing large set of documents, making sense of it, trying to identify specific anomalies. But I do want to take a moment to talk about the definition of AI. When you tell anybody AI 5 years ago or even earlier, most people meant machine learning, which is narrow AI, which is identifying pattern, predicting. Technology has moved so fast, what we now call AI today, or the most of the world, that is generative AI. So these are large language models which are trained on the entire internet. So they can actually produce text, code, videos, audio, all kind of objects. So in our daily use cases, if a software engineer can literally use AI as an assistant to write a lot of code, and I want to echo Justin again that if someone is really expert at what they are doing, then they can really amplify their output by using AI well.
Earlier, you referenced enterprise versions of software, et cetera. Could you define what enterprise means in that context?
So enterprise in a literal sense means a business or a company. So when we have a tool that is custom designed, bespoke for a company, that is the enterprise version of of a generative pre-trained transformer, GPT. So US government has its own enterprise version of Go GPT.
That's great. So Justin, back to you. Back here on campus, you and I are both involved in IU's Gen AI initiative. So can you describe a little bit more about what that is, building on Karna's explanation of what Gen AI means, and then explain your role in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first, I think Karna hit something really important is this distinction between AI and generative AI. Mm-hmm. And we're at a point where we're conflating everything. Everything's a GPT, it seems like. And so it's like Band-Aid is the name for all bandages, right? So we've gotten to that point. And so part of the generative AI initiatives that we're taking up here at IU include a certain level of education between the fact that we have been using AI for a long time and the machine learning approach and then how software is taking that up. And now thinking more along the lines of this just sort of generative explosion, which is causing all the panic, right, and the fear, and then now hopefully the transition. But so we have a couple of different initiatives that are part of the Gen AI purview, including, we have the Gen AI 101 course, which is Brian Williams built, which has a very practical use to generative AI. I'm part of the UITS Learning Technologies group leading the Generative AI Faculty Fellows Program, which again is how we think about training and upskilling faculty and developing sort of, AI fluencies, if you will. But where there's larger initiatives across the university with thinking about what does the future of AI look like, what does education look like in 2030 when you're in an AI era, and how can we imagine IU as being a leader in this conversation? So luckily, I'm a co-stream leader, I think is the technical term, right? Which means I get to do more work. There's a number of these work streams, part of a planning grant to imagine the future of IU, to really support our expansion of IU, or AI at IU at scale. And I know you're on my work stream, so you get to do the work with me. But there's 4 of these different streams to try and imagine, what does it look like in terms of change management, in terms of student success and workforce readiness. I mean, this is a big one for me. I think recent studies have shown that the Microsoft report last year, I think said, the workforce report said something like 75% of employers were hiring people with AI skills over people with actual experience in the job. Right, so it's sort of this kind of astronomical thing, and so it's this really destabilizing sort of moment in our sort of landscape. And the reality is that initiatives like the generative AI stuff we're doing here are in reaction to the fact that what we're dealing with is not another Wikipedia moment, but rather the advent of electricity. We're having an entire economy shift, and so we have to figure out a way to help everybody get to this point: students, faculty, staff alike. And I always joke and say it's the one moment in the history of higher education where everybody needs some form of professional development, because nobody's really an expert in how to use these tools well. We're getting closer, but we're not there yet. So those are some of the initiatives we're doing. There's lots of other sort of small pockets that are tied to that larger initiative or effort by the university. But that's sort of hopefully that helps frame a little bit of the conversation. So the next students who come out of here can do what Karna's doing and be ahead of the curve a little bit, right?
Yes. And in the college, I am the point person trying to identify where expertise lies in Gen AI use in faculty's research and in their teaching and in their service, so that we can take up Gen AI 201, which is the second version of that training that's more specialized towards the skills that students in the natural and mathematical sciences, for example, and the social sciences, and then the arts and humanities need to have to be able to apply their strengths that they're developing in their courses of study to then use Gen AI tools successfully to get better outcomes, to be more precise, and then to synthesize themselves what they're learning and what skills they are developing, which is, I think, part of what we hope students achieve in college. Now, Karna, you work at the intersection of AI, systems engineering, and business strategy. Where do you see the biggest gap right now between what AI can do technically and what organizations are actually prepared to learn to do and adopt?
That's an excellent question. Thank you, Vivian. The pace of innovation is so much that organizations are not ready to adopt. We need to have right structure, right governance processes in place securely, and those should be trustworthy so that the AI can make use of data. We need to make data ready for AI consumption. So only if you have all of those ready, good data, well structured, with good processes where you are evaluating it, you can authenticate the source of generation. Only then AI will give you what you need. So it's like garbage in, garbage out. In this case, if you have good input, then great output, great decisions. But if your input is not great, then your decisions are not going to be optimal, and that is going to increase the risk. So the challenge here is to how do we shape our business processes and rethink how we have been doing to utilize AI at the maximum advantage. So I think I say that again, we need to make our data ready for AI consumption.
So since you were talking about the integrity of the data that goes in determines how well data comes out, could you talk a little bit more about the work you do? It's not using the same tools that we are training our students to use at IU. Is that correct? I mean, how do you keep the work that you do safe?
Yeah, so that is a pretty straightforward answer in the sense that our US government has a separate network in which all the sensitive work is done. So we operate in an air-gapped environment. So it's entirely different from the normal network. So it keeps us very secure. However, if we want to use any tools which are available to the general public for our purpose, then we have to have extreme, very critical processes that scrutinizes that there is no prompt injection or there is no adversarial machine learning being acted by adversaries on us. So we need a very robust cyber infrastructure and a platform to ensure that we can benefit from these tools which are being built in the public domain.
Yeah. So can I ask? Well, I'll add to this a little bit, Karna. So this is something I talk about with the faculty a lot. A lot of major companies have their own in-house LLMs, right? They disclose network security. They have they built their own stuff. So I know like AT&T has their own version. Cisco has their own version, right? And so when I say I'm training students for the future, I'm not training them to use ChatGPT for their work forever. I'm training them a way of thinking about these tools and leveraging them in a skill set. I'm assuming, while you guys are in a closed network, you have your own in-house Gen AI stuff, correct?
Yeah. So the way I can answer is the most common practice that companies and organizations are coming up with is called a technique called retrieval augmented generation, where you ingest all your enterprise data or documents and convert that into mathematical representation called vectors and vector embeddings. And then when you ask a question, the AI will have relevant context from those embeddings or those from relevant context data. And then it will use that so that it doesn't hallucinate. There is no confabulation. It will use authentic, grounded sources to generate an answer. And that is the most common practice right now.
Yeah. So for us, that would be Notebook LM, right?
Yes.
So that's a IU tool we're allowed to use. I mean, Notebook, a lot of folks can use Notebook LM. It's not unique. It's a Google tool. But that retrieval augmented generation platform is a Notebook LM, which I know a lot of faculty like because of the same reason. It's like they're giving it the data they want to work on, minimalizes hallucinations, and it's got a closed, safe kind of engagement for students.
And then bringing that back to students, what I think one of the things they need to become aware of is that the way that they use Gen AI tools for their own enjoyment or ease of life, it has to be different than how they use them for work purposes, even though the same types of skill sets could be applied either way. Karna, did you want to join in?
Yeah, just wanted to add that every time, so in organization and companies, when we are working in a team, it is very important the answers are consistent and traceable. So if two people are asking the same questions, if you experiment this with an open source ChatGPT, the answer may be different depending on how they ask. but we want consistent, authentic answers. And we want to trace it back. Where is this coming from? So oftentimes we are able to pinpoint, oh, this is coming from the 7th paragraph on the 122nd page from this document. Now that is when AI is helpful.
Right, because if Justin and I both ask the same tool, say Gemini, for a pasta recipe, each Gemini recipe is going to be influenced by our own search history and whatever search engine we are using. And so we won't get inherently the same top pasta recipe.
Probably not, especially if it's listening to my house. You know.
Okay, so Justin, let's turn to teaching then. And everyone's talking about AI in the classroom, whether it's good, whether it's bad. Based on your work with you, I use Gen AI initiative and your own classroom experience, how are you integrating AI in your teaching of undergraduates and graduate students when you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different approaches to thinking about the way AI can fit into pedagogy, right, and practice in all kinds of meaningful ways. So on the one end, one of my go-to activities is, so I'm a big fan of active learning in the classroom, you know, and leveraging active learning, but I happen to often use the same one over and over again because I like it. So I have a little bit of an agent built in ChatGPT where I can say, today I'm teaching this and teaching that. Give me 3 different active learning strategies that I haven't used in the last week. And so it'll like randomly generate the things that I might try this week, given what I'm trying to cover. So as a teacher, it's like, oh, it's increasing my variety. It's built on solid active learning principles. It's not making things up. I've given it all the stuff it's sort of pulling from. So that's an easy like, oh, okay, maybe my class will be better today. Or
now, can you pause for a second and describe? You just referenced using an agent. Can you talk about agentic AI and how that? Is what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I mean, we in the variety of the tools that we have the option of creating agentic elements or agentic AI practices, and they're not autonomous agents in that they go and do things for you on their own, and not that level of agent yet. But it's basically a chat or an engagement with the AI that you have predetermined a set of either data that's pulling from, or you've uploaded the context and content, and you've given it a direction and often given it some questions and practices that you want it to execute. So in my case, it's built around, I'm a teacher of this kind of subject matter. These are the ways that I like to teach. Here's what active learning looks like. So I feed it all this information so it has a knowledge base to work from. And then essentially it's just, I open up the agent and it gives me a prompt. What are you teaching today and what would you like to do? So that's...
And going back to first principles, Why is that called an agent?
Why is it called an agent? Because it sort of has its own level sense of agency, even though it's not acting without the human in the loop, right? So it's more like an advanced chat. So Karna, you can just break this down further. You're an expert in this area.
So an agent, essentially how we would define is it has a specific goal, a specific process, and a specific task. It is very rule-based. So to Justin's example of booking a travel, so if a prompt has a travel request, then the agent exactly knows what websites to go to, what information to collect, and what actions to take in a sequential order. So if we can really, so the benefit of AI is really leveraging this kind of automation and finding information in real time and providing you and assisting you in your daily life. Fancy way to say that, enterprise use cases.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like your teaching assistant.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about it in a normal chat with, let's say, Gemini, right? You're in there. If I wanted to do this for my class and I use this, I'd have to put in the information every time in a new chat. So the agent eliminates that repetitive action. So the agents that we have, the gems in Gemini, right, eliminates that to a certain extent. So that's one use case, right? But I'm also a writing teacher, and so I mean, I may be going against the entire field at this point, and I say I teach students how to write with AI and how to leverage AI, but also how to use them as part of like digital creative workflows. So they're making multimedia essays. We do a project where we partner with the IU archives, so they can't actually use the AI to do the research. They have to go and physically get a box of stuff and sift through it. But then we turn that into sort of a richer media kind of engagement. And so AI is part of their ability to think through and craft a script or develop a narrative. But ultimately, they're performing that work across media. And so it's part of the workflow that they're going through. I always say, I don't know if you're familiar with Edward de Bono's 6 Hats of Thinking. So he's a philosopher and a psychologist, I think. He developed the term lateral thinking.
Oh, yes.
And so he has these 6 hats of thinking. And like the white hat is for information and analysis, and the red hat is for emotion, and the green hat is creativity. So it goes on. And I always use them as a way of helping students understand that when you're using AI, you basically want it to be wearing one of these hats with you. And you can try multiple different hats. It's a thought partner on the way to the end goal, part of the workflow. It's not the end goal on its own. And so in my class, we leverage it in those sort of ways. I mean, across multiple stages of the writing process. But I think it's a healthier way of talking about AI and engaging the ethical conversations and responsibilities rather than just saying, no, you can't use it. Or yes, you can, but tell me why. I mean, there's got to be a better ground for us to offer guidelines and guardrails so they're ready and successful when they leave here to have these conversations with their employers or in their own work whenever they get there.
So I actually have an example from the college. Professor Tom Busey in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences teaches a class in which among the things he wants students to practice is flirting, because it teaches people about human interactions. You can imagine the awkwardness involved in having real students flirt with one another. So instead, he's built an agent, and the students are assigned to flirt with the agent. It's the kind of thing where you can use it in a focused way to have students practice certain kinds of skills without the possible negative downsides of having students flirt with one another, or as the case may be. I also know that there are language instructors who use chatbots to practice with students who are learning the target language. But the benefit of having that, instead of having only newbie students talking with one another, is that they can have a consistent accent, a native speaker accent, as opposed to reinforcing the Midwestern approaches to speaking whatever. So any examples from graduate classes that you're aware of?
We've seen, graduate classes are a little bit different because there's a really interesting split between at the graduate level, those who are like, we don't want to use them or we can't use them because we're trying to become an expert in our field and we really need to do this work. I think they intuitively understand the importance of going through the effort to become an expert in a field, versus others who leverage them at scale to say, no, this is speeding up my research, help me identify better resources. They're using tools like Perplexity or Elicit to drive accurate information to them, to unsource materials they wouldn't find otherwise. Normally, when I was doing it, it would have been like I would have went to the library and asked the librarian for help because they're the smartest people in there. But so we're seeing this kind of tension between dead set resistance against it. Particularly, a lot of them are built on like what's an environmental hill they want to die on. They're doing it for purposes that are not related to their work. But there are also others who just absolutely are leveraging these tools as part of their workflow, and they're doing incredible work and bringing just a much greater depth of information to themselves to start with. And that's just a small use case. And not only our department, but I've seen it across graduate programs all across the IU system.
Yes, and so in the college, there are faculty who have built their own LLMs and incorporated them into their classrooms. I personally am trying to teach graduate students to use this to help them with their job search, to better understand what an academic job search looks like, to engage with the Gen AI tool and ask it to act as a headhunter for an academic job search. Again, and elucidate the steps. How would you prepare your materials? Just to kind of check what they're hearing from their advisors with what they are able to suss out by looking at job ads. And then to have them, how would you translate my CV into a resume? And just understand the various different sets of expectations that are built in to job searches and job markets that may not be incredibly intuitive for someone trying to look for a job outside of academia. Now, that's a harder ask, I think, for students in the humanities than it may have been for you, Karna. So as an IU grad, how was that transition for you doing your Ph.D. and then also having that minor in scientific computing? And then how did you get from that to where you are? Was that a straight line, or did you know to?
I would like to talk a bit about IU here because my time at IU, if I have to summarize, the word comes to my mind is gratitude. Not only my advisors like, Dr. Tom Staben Cameron and Dr. Dick Dudison, they prepared me like solidly in technical, but even professors such as Katie Pilachowski and Eileen Friel, they really helped me out, and a range of other astronomy professors with guiding me in a career in science policy. So it would be accurate to say that after spending foundational years at IU, they literally propelled my career into a right orbit and where I'm staying afloat currently. So my first job out of IU was at National Science Foundation. I was a fellowship for a year, and then I went to State Department and transitioned into national security. What I do also want to mention that IU is a gem of a place where even beyond your department, the College of Arts and Sciences and the University Graduate School, they have a range of programs which I was able to contribute to, like Foundations in Science and Math. It's a summer program for high schoolers. And then there is Emissaries for Graduate Student Diversity. And then we had like Science Blog. So these different opportunities um, really propelled and facilitated my transition into a proper career. And with AI, now imagine how effective one could make their career if they are using AI in the right way to ensure that they get custom advice, they find the right information, and really optimize their strengths and focus on their strengths.
Great. And so, staying with you, Karna, how do you think AI will reshape the workforce in sectors like national security, aerospace, or advanced industry? I mean, you're in that now. It has reshaped it. How is it going to keep reshaping it? And then what should today's students or early career professionals be preparing for in anticipation of those changes?
So going back to my time at NSF in mid-20, 2018, we used to discuss that everyone should have data science literacy. It's just like how everyone should have communication literacy, right? So coming into IU, I would say from day one, students should be trained in how to use AI. So they should have AI literacy, how to use it for your advantage. It should help you rather than consume you. So Justin earlier mentioned, right, the expertise. So whatever domain you have, whether it is humanities or arts or engineering, social sciences, you need to be expert in what you're doing. So you need to have that as a foundation. Only then AI can amplify your output 10x. So we in the workforce are really looking for people who would really understand their subject deeply and have good human skills. We want nice human beings who have great communication skills. So the basics, I think the basics that a university like IU prepares you with, that cannot change. And then AI is simply an assistant or your teammate who is helping you along.
Okay, because that's one of the 4 pillars that we're trying to stress in terms of our liberal arts education, experiential learning as well. And then in the subcommittee, substream that you're leading, Justin, can you talk about how the assumption is that AI literacy will spread across the areas of learning that a liberal arts college or university really emphasizes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when we're talking about being AI ready, right, this idea that students need to have a kind of AI literacy, the initial response for most faculty or educators is, well, let's build a course, right? Like a course solves everything. And there's nothing wrong with having a course that's tied to that. But I think this moment and when we're thinking about how it works at the university level is much more like writing across the curriculum in the 1980s and 1990s, where we realized that while there are disciplines that are experts in teaching writing and capitalizing writing, for students to become really sort of competent and at advanced levels with writing skills, it needs to be sort of saturated in multiple areas and taken up with sort of disciplinary inflections. And so while I can teach you to prompt engineer, that's not the same thing as you doing that to it's a process you can learn, but then how you apply that in a class on coding versus a class on historical research are just different kind of applications. And so in our work stream, but also part of the larger initiative, it's trying to find a way to, how are we going to have this be part of the very fabric of the IU sort of space and culture and not just be these one-offs or these catch-all spots for, well, that's where you go to become AI literate. No, AI literacy should be part of the larger spectrum, and then that's where you go to develop expertise with AI literacies in specific ways. So yeah, but Karna, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and so when we talk about it, these are all great points that literacy is so important, because if you don't have literacy and you are using these tools, it's actually going to hurt the student, because then you are not able to judge. And I'm sure professors are so well aware, and they are probably thinking about this all the time, that if students are generating content and citing that in their official work, and if they don't really understand it, then it's going to pose risk to them. And if we are doing that for an organization, for an employer, it's a big risk. And just, it cannot happen, essentially.
So as we're, getting ready to and are thinking about this topic, what are you most excited about when it comes to AI? And then the flip side of that, what's keeping you up at night about AI or how people use it or how people don't use it?
I guess I'll talk about the flip side first. It is that I worry that people will skip learning. Put it very simply, you cannot skip learning because that will be very unfortunate. Because I feel like we live in a time where all these resources we have, if you look at all the knowledge that we have at our fingertip, most US presidents did not have that. We have access to so much knowledge. So it would be really unfortunate if we don't build the foundations. And what is so exciting about AI is that, so there is something called Turing test in computer science. How do you know? So Alan Turing, the famous computer scientist, he came up with this test that if you are talking to a human and a chatbot, and if you cannot figure out which one is a chatbot, that means the chatbot has achieved artificial intelligence. And we always joke that if Alan Turing was alive today, he would have said that, you know what, when the Turing test has been passed. But we know that we are not in the artificial general intelligence realm yet, that AI is not sentient. However, the opportunities that it presents for creativity are simply enormous. So that is what I'm most excited about, that the creative people can really exercise, create novel work, and get exposure to so much knowledge and use it. So I think that's really exciting.
Okay, thank you. Justin?
Oh, yeah, these are big ones. So I think, my concerns are that we're going to continue to see sort of battles against AI and a resistance to using AI, and people sort of not acknowledging that it's not a crisis of education. It's a catalyst for evolution in education, because to me what it's doing is it's exposing some fundamental problems that we've had in education for decades, right? Where we think we're content experts, and disciplines are not just about content; they're about ways of knowing, doing, and making in that framework. And so the tool is undermining those who only focus on content knowledge, right? It's sort of fun, just cutting that out from underneath their feet. So I'm concerned that we're going to continue to see this long-term resistance, or sort of not get sort of a significant investment from not only faculty but students as well. Not because I think everything should be AI, but because I think once we see the brilliant colleagues that we have sort of figure out how this improves their work, how it can create deeper learning structures, how it can maximize the kind of engagement or critical thinking. They always say we're going to get rid of critical thinking. No, what do you mean by critical thinking? Because these tools can absolutely help you engage in the skills that we've tied to critical thinking. Not replace it, but help you learn those skills. And so to me, the concern is the longer we resist this sort of moment, the further behind we fall a little bit, right? And people are like, well, I'm not going to use AI. And I'm like, well, then you can't use a Google search because it does the AI summary and synthesis now on everything you search. So that's my concern, is that a hesitancy is going to keep us behind. But on the flip side, I'm really excited to see what happens when we get to the brilliant folks that we work with, and they buy in, they see the opportunity, and they start to figure out new and unique ways of doing work in their field, of thinking about reshaping learning, of creating opportunities for students, particularly as you think about those folks who do like community learning or service learning engagements and can talk about applied AI in a meaningful context with measurable outcomes and measurable impact. So that to me is where we're going to see lots of fun stuff really open for us. So there's so many things I'm excited about, but in the education space specifically, those are the tensions. How long are we going to see this large-scale resistance if we still have that? I think we're moving a little bit beyond that. But more importantly, what's it open up when we see folks sort of find a new way through?
Karna, you had your hand.
Yeah, so Justin talked about the AI being catalyst for education. And I think this is a golden opportunity for all the educators. So think about precision medicine. What does it essentially mean? That every patient has a unique need and you satisfy that. Similarly, with AI, we can now do precision education. Each student has unique strengths. There are areas in which they can uniquely improve by using the AI tool. And I think if you give your graded test to the AI, it should tell you that you need to work on these things, or this topic's more than the other, and it can iteratively ensure that you build that competency. So it's like the resources at your fingertip are simply awesome.
So thanks very much to both of you for this conversation and for your insights. I've really enjoyed myself and the discussion. And for everyone watching or listening, thanks so much for joining us. We hope you'll check out our next episode. Please subscribe to the IU College Insider, which is a collaboration between the College of Arts and Sciences at Indiana University Bloomington and Indiana Public Media. See you next time.